What's up, world history? Thank you for joining me for another on the line lesson. Today we're going to do another screencast lecture uh, coming to you from Mr. Roper's home, and I hope everyone is doing well. And so remember, for these screencast lectures, you're going to take your notes on the line on your Cornell notes, your Cornell Master. You're going to put your topics on the left side of the notes, and you're going to put your bullet points on the right side of the notes. So to the left are the topics, and to the right, you're going to put your bullet points. And so let's get out your butter because I'm going to be on a roll. And so today's topic, we've been covering the end of the Cold War. Last week we covered the end of the Cold War in Eastern Europe, how Gorbachev, my man Gorbachev, opened up people in Eastern Europe to take their make their own choices. We have the fall of the Soviet Union. Countries like Czechoslovakia, Romania, Poland opt to go to democracy. The Berlin Wall falls, so there's no longer East Germany and West Germany. Well, today we're going to talk about what happens in China. And China is going to follow its own path. And so, what ends the outcome with communism in China is going to be very difficult, or not very difficult, very different than what you heard happening in Europe. So, here we go. Our first topic is Mao Zedong's legacy. And if you remember, Mao Zedong is the founder of communism in China. We learned about this before we went to online learning when we were in the classroom. Remember those days? And so Mao Zedong, you remember, he started the communist revolution. He won the loyalty of the peasants. And Mao believed in peasant equality. Remember, he had the revolution against education, where he said that the peasant, the farmer, was the hero in China. And he tried to get people to buy in to sacrificing for the overall good of China. People should not worry about their individual goals, their individual opinions, but everything was about sacrificing for the good of the nation. Um, the problem with that, the mistake with that, is it eliminates incentives. Remember when we talked about communism in our class, I told you if, you know, everyone gets the same grade no matter what. Um, how hard would you work if I told you no matter what you do, you're going to get a B? Some people would be happy. People that aren't happy are the people that want to get an A. How hard would you work at your job if you knew that you were never going to get a raise? So the problem with Mao's philosophy is that it takes away incentive. Well, Mao steps down in the 1970s, and China begins to undergo some changes. So that brings us to China in the 1970s. And China in the 1970s, um, for the first time, starts to try to advance in technology. They start sending students abroad to Western Europe, to the United States, to try to bring technological innovation back to China. Uh, in the 1970s, for the first time, the United States opens up diplomatic relations with the United States. They invited President Richard Nixon, came over to China. They had this thing called ping pong diplomacy, where the United States table tennis team, led by Captain Forrest Gump, went to China to play ping pong to try to improve the relations with the Chinese people. Sidebar, that was just a joke. Forrest Gump is not real. That was just a movie. But part of that movie is Forrest Gump in the fictional character in the real life event goes to China and plays ping pong against the Chinese national ping pong team. So in the 70s, China begins up opening up relations with the United States, they start undergoing a few changes in their economy. They're trying to bring technology, and things really start to change in the 1980s. So in the 1980s, their leader was a guy by the name of, I'm going to try my best with the pronunciation here, Deng Xiaoping. And so Mr. Xiaoping is going to bring about quite a bit of economic reform in the 1980s. So you don't have to, again, write all of this down. Just type some of it down in your own words. Here are the bullet points on the line. So in 1980, Xiaoping is trying to bring progress in agriculture, industry, defense, science, technology. For the first time, farmers are able to make a profit, and so it's not all just about sacrificing for the greater good of China. Farmers can actually make some money. The economy begins to grow. People start buying Western civilization appliances, televisions. Chinese youth start wearing some of the same clothes that American youth are wearing. Fancy hotels start popping up in China. People start listening to music that Americans and Western Europeans are listening to. And so in the 80s, there's a lot of change. There's a lot more freedom economically, a lot more incentive. There are limits under Xiaoping, though, and the limits are the limits to people's freedom. They do not bring democracy to China, and so you are not allowed to criticize the Communist Party under Xiaoping's rule. If you're calling for democracy, you could be given a very, very long sentence in prison. And so, even though there's economic freedom in China, there's no democratic freedom going on. Now, the big event of the 1980s deals with Chinese college students. So let's talk about Chinese students in the 1980s. Many Chinese students in the 80s were studying abroad, like I told you, because of Mao Zedong's emphasis on the peasant and lack of emphasis on education. China had been behind in technology, so they began sending a lot of people to Western Europe or America to study technology. And so you have a lot of Chinese students that go to college in America, and they begin to question China's lack of political freedom. So, you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and you go to the United States anywhere from a year to 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and you're living under all this economic freedom and political freedom, and you see how Americans are allowed to criticize and question their public officials, and you come back to China where everything is censored, and you really begin to question the philosophy and the system, and you're like, man, this is messed up. And so young people in China are going to organize a protest. And that brings us to our next topic, Tiananmen Square. In April of 1989, 100,000 college students are going to, and young people who are just out of college are going to fill a huge public place in Beijing, China. And Tiananmen Square is this huge square right in the heart of the city of Beijing. And you have 100,000 students that gather there, and they're calling for Xiaoping to resign, and they're calling for democracy in China. So just like people in Germany protested for the Berlin Wall to come down, people in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania protested for democracy. Remember what happened to Nicolae Ceausescu? The Chinese students, they think that they can make what happened in Eastern Europe happen in China. And so thousands decide to go on a hunger strike. Millions of people, about a million people, not millions, I'm sorry, about 1 million people come to Beijing to support the students. So people from all over the world, media, people are in China in support of these students. And they're calling again for the government to resign, and they're calling for democracy. So Deng Xiaoping, he's going to respond. So that brings us to our next topic. Deng responds. So I just used his first name there. I should have put the whole name. So this is the leader Xiaoping. His response. He declares martial law and he orders in 250,000 troops. Most of the students and most of the people there to support the students, they flee. 3,000 brave souls stay, and they decide to erect a 33-foot statue. They call it the Goddess of Democracy. Let me change my screen here. And here is a picture of the Goddess of Democracy. And obviously, the Goddess of Democracy is supposed to look like the Statue of Liberty here in the United States. And so on June 4th, 1989, Xiaoping orders the troops into Tiananmen Square to take out the students. Now, a very famous incident, a very famous photo, is that of the Tank Man. As the tanks are coming into Tiananmen Square, a man pops out in the middle of the street and tries to block the tanks. And this photo is one of the most famous photos in world events. And this photo was shown on Time magazine. And this is a brave guy. If you're a basketball fan, any hoop fans, Delmas, Jaden, Caleb, Breon, this guy's about to take a charge. This guy is standing in the lane, in the way, protecting the paint. And obviously, this is way more serious than taking a charge in a basketball game. This guy is risking his life. And finally, someone came on the street and took him off before the tanks. I mean, this could have really got ugly. Luckily, someone got him off the street and out of the way of the tanks. And his name was, this man was never identified. If you want to Google Tank Man, you can look at more photos. There's also videos on YouTube of the Tank Man incident. And so what happens is the troops come in on June 4th, 1989, and they smash the statue and they open fire. They wound thousands of people and kill hundreds. The Chinese government has actually never released the full body count, but a lot of people died that day. And so this is the end of the protest and essentially the end of democracy in China. So communism, China is one place where communism is going to be preserved and communism is going to stay. So let's look at our next topic, economic growth 1990 to 2020. So over the next 30 years, China is going to become a real economic power. And there is a lot of economic growth in China, a lot of manufacturing of inexpensive goods. A lot of electronics are made in China, and by the early 2000s, and the stock market opens up in China. By the early 2000s, there's just a rapid economic growth in this country. This is not without a cost. A lot of workers in Chinese factories had to live under poor working conditions and low salaries. A lot of farmers were unhappy about the lack of increase in salary. But nevertheless, China becomes a huge economic power in the next century. Now, that's economically. Let's look at a few more topics. Population control in China, limits on freedom. First, let's talk about population control. So, China was an overcrowded country, and the government was worried about overpopulation in China and what that can do to that can lead to overcrowded living conditions, unsanitary conditions, decrease in health. And so in 1979, China began advocating one-child families. And so they started encouraging families to only have one child. They would provide incentives such as education benefits, free childcare, better housing, if a couple would limit their family to just one child. This did not this did limit the population growth, not as much as they would like, because what they didn't understand was with a increase in healthcare, you're going to have a increase in life expectancy. So people are going to live longer, and so you're going to have a lot more old people. So even though you're not having as many babies born into China, you're having people that live longer. By 2015, China ended the one-child policy and changed it to a two-child policy. And so now the government is encouraging people to have two children. Limits on freedom. Political freedom has continued to be suppressed in China. You're not allowed to speak out against the government. And there are huge limits in China on social media. So things like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, those things are banned in China. I mean, just think of this. All the people in the world that are on those social media websites, how many more people would be on social media if these things were allowed in China? I know Mark Zuckerberg has gone to China to try to negotiate with the government to bring Facebook there, but the government has decided to ban those social media platforms. There are Chinese social media platforms in China that the government monitors. Okay, so that is the end of my lecture. What you want to do now is you have a couple more topics. You see China 2020. So what you need to do now is underneath China 2020 is you need to type two paragraphs. So when I grade your notes, I'll be looking for the bullet points on my screencast lecture, and then I'll be looking for two paragraphs. So I'd like you to type two paragraphs about what is going on in China today in 2020. Possible topics in your two paragraphs. You could talk about government policies, democratic progress, social media in China, the controversy with Hong Kong, the Chinese economy, Chinese culture. You could talk about the impact of COVID-19 in China, if you like. But after this screencast lecture, I'll be looking for the two paragraphs on China, and then I'll be looking for video notes. I've posted two videos today, one about CNN reporting in 2019 on the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, and then I posted another video on a guy training with the Chinese troops near Tiananmen Square, and a tradition they have with raising the flag. So you need to take two or three video bullet points on those two videos, and when you've done that, you're done for the day. I hope everyone is well. I hope we're washing our hands. We're staying safe. We're getting close to the end of the year now, so we want to make sure we're turning in our assignments on the line so we can get credit. Remember, you are allowed to choose a grade if you like. And so, again, my thoughts are with everyone. I hope everyone is good. Nothing but the best of wishes for you. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and I will post one more lesson on the line Thursday. Look for that, and take care. I hope everyone is doing great. Goodbye.